The galaxy had waited with curiosity when humanity was invited to stand among the great powers. For centuries the Empire had defined who belonged and who did not, dismissing younger civilizations as unworthy of voice or influence. Earth, restless and ambitious, had pursued recognition not through conquest but through diplomacy. The diplomat chosen was not a warrior, not a general, but a figure who embodied calm reason, patience, and the hope that humanity's bloody past could finally yield to something greater. They walked into the council chamber carrying words rather than weapons, trusting in the sanctity of dialogue that every other race claimed to honor. The gathered species watched with quiet fascination as this new arrival, fragile by galactic standards, spoke of cooperation, exchange, and survival through unity. But the Empire, whose dominance stretched across star systems, heard only weakness. To them, kindness was naivete, compromise was submission, and appeals to peace were invitations to domination. Their representative, draped in the insignia of conquest, sneered openly as the human's voice carried through the chamber. While other delegates listened in uneasy silence, the Empire whispered to their attendants, mocking the very notion that a world so young could claim equal standing. The diplomat spoke of Earth's history, of wars that had torn continents apart, of lessons purchased with blood, of humanity's unyielding will to rise again after devastation. They did not hide the truth of humanity's flaws but offered it as proof that growth was possible. They extended their words as a bridge, an attempt to anchor trust between species who had once known only suspicion. The silence that followed should have been one of contemplation, but instead it was shattered by cruelty. The Empire's representative rose, laughter sharp as blades, and declared before all assembled that humanity had no place among the stars. They accused Earth of arrogance, daring to believe that survival among predators could be purchased with words. Then, with deliberate malice, they gave the order. Guards seized the diplomat, and in that sacred hall of supposed civility, they were executed with ruthless efficiency. No duel, no trial, no warning, only the swift ending of a life offered in peace. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some delegates turned their eyes away, unwilling to watch, others froze in fear, calculating whether objection would cost their worlds. A few shouted in protest, but their voices were drowned beneath the Empire's proclamation that this slaughter was a lesson to all who would dare stand beside them without bowing first. The diplomat's final expression was not fear but disbelief, the stunned recognition that centuries of human hope had been betrayed in an instant. Across Earth and its colonies, billions saw the event unfold in real time. Every word, every gesture, every final breath was transmitted back to the people who had sent their envoy into the galaxy's heart. At first there was silence, as if the collective mind of humanity could not process what it had witnessed. Then silence gave way to grief, raw and unrestrained. People wept in homes, in streets, in the control rooms of fleets. They remembered the diplomat not as a politician but as a symbol of what humanity wanted to become, better than its past, braver than its scars. Yet beneath the grief came something darker, something older than diplomacy, older than reason. Rage, heady and relentless, began to spread like fire through every human soul. No empire had ever humiliated them so openly, no enemy had ever butchered one who carried their hopes without sparking retaliation. History was proof of this truth. Humanity endured insult poorly, and murder not at all. What had been a single death became a wound inflicted on every person born of Earth. The Empire laughed in triumph, believing the act had cemented their dominance, but they had only sown the seed of their undoing. Across the chamber, species who had known humanity only through rumor felt the shift immediately. They saw in human eyes the storm that had broken countless tyrants before, a fury that once awakened could not be silenced. The broadcast ended with the Empire's mocking declaration that this was the fate of those who dreamed of equality. But Earth did not answer with words. Earth's silence was heavier than any response, a silence that spread through cities, ships, and colonies alike. It was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of breath drawn before a roar, of steel tempered before the strike, of vengeance forged in the heart of a wounded species. The galaxy would come to understand soon enough that in killing one human, the Empire had condemned themselves to war with all of them. The aftermath of the slaughter did not pass as the Empire imagined. They believed humanity would retreat into obscurity, cowed by fear and grief, but they misunderstood the species they had provoked. In the hours following the diplomat's death, the broadcasts played on every human world without pause. The image of a voice of peace struck down became an unshakable memory, replayed in silence and in fury. Mourning ceremonies erupted spontaneously, from the oldest cities on Earth to the smallest colonies clinging to the edges of space. Crowds stood beneath banners marked only by a single star, the symbol of the envoy who had gone unarmed into the council. For a short span, humanity wept. Then tears hardened into resolve. Governments that once argued over borders and influence set aside disputes with unprecedented speed. Leaders who only days earlier quarreled over resources now appeared side by side in broadcasts, united in tone, their voices carrying the same unshakable message. What had been scattered voices became a single will. Humanity had always been divided until threatened. Each era of its history proved the same truth: nothing bound them together more tightly than an attack from beyond their walls. Now the insult had not merely touched a nation but the entire species. The machinery of industry shifted overnight. Shipyards that had been producing commercial craft began retooling for warships. Civilian manufacturers altered assembly lines to produce armor, ammunition, and components for fleet expansion. Scientists abandoned long-term projects to focus on immediate military application of every discovery at hand. Artificial intelligence that once optimized agriculture was redirected to logistics planning. Medical researchers turned their knowledge to rapid combat triage systems. The mobilization resembled humanity's great wars of the 20th century, but on a scale magnified by an interstellar stage. Families gave willingly. Volunteers filled recruiting stations until commanders could barely process them. Colonies that had once resisted central authority pledged resources without condition. Even criminal organizations found themselves offering ships and manpower, not from loyalty, but because outrage burned hotter than rivalry. It was not patriotism alone. It was the shared recognition that humanity's survival demanded vengeance. The memory of the diplomat's words gave their cause dignity, but the brutality of their death gave it fury. Every human broadcast, every channel of communication, echoed with the same phrase repeated in countless tongues and dialects: never again. Artists painted murals of the envoy standing against a storm of alien cruelty. Writers poured manifestos of anger and determination onto networks. Musicians composed hymns that stirred the blood, calling for retribution not for conquest, but for dignity. The culture of an entire species shifted in a matter of days. Across the galaxy, other species watched uneasily. Some felt sympathy, recalling their own experiences under the Empire's heel, but few dared to voice it. Others, more cautious, whispered warnings that humanity was different, that their unity was not a mere slogan but a weapon sharpened by centuries of internal strife. A few diplomats petitioned the Council to condemn the Empire's act, but those motions were crushed, drowned by the Empire's dominance. Their silence did nothing to slow humanity's awakening. The military councils formed quickly. Admirals, generals, and strategists met in constant rotation, drawing from centuries of recorded campaigns. They studied the Empire's fleet deployments, their supply lines, their political structure. What they found was arrogance layered over vulnerability. The Empire had grown used to compliance. They had never faced a species prepared to fight without restraint, to accept losses and return with greater ferocity each time. The more humanity analyzed, the clearer the path became. The war would be costly, but it could be won. In every human city, in every station orbiting distant suns, screens lit up with the same transmission. A single voice carried humanity's reply. There would be no plea, no negotiation, no appeal to fairness. There would only be the promise of consequence. The words were brief, stripped to flourish, sharpened to a blade's edge. You slaughtered our envoy. You scorned our peace. We will answer. When the message ended, silence again fell over Earth. It was not the silence of shock this time but of preparation, a species drawing in breath before unleashing everything it possessed. The Empire had mistaken humanity's grief for weakness. What they had birthed instead was unity, will, and the ancient human instinct to fight back with overwhelming force. The galaxy understood at last that the death of one diplomat had ignited the wrath of an entire world. Humanity was coming, and they would not stop until the Empire paid in full. The Empire received humanity's declaration not with alarm but with mockery. Their envoys spread messages across the council, laughing at the thought of a fledgling species daring to bare its teeth. They pointed to the size of Earth's fleets, barely a fraction of their own, and to the relative youth of human colonies compared to the centuries-old holdings of the Empire. To their analysts, the conclusion was obvious: humanity could be extinguished in weeks. The Empire had destroyed older civilizations with less effort, and they saw no reason to treat this challenge as anything more than another opportunity to parade their supremacy. Their overconfidence bled into every decision. They reassured their vassals that Earth's defiance would serve as a lesson, a reminder of what happened when a younger race forgot its place. Advisors cautioned against underestimation, citing human adaptability, but those warnings were dismissed. To the Empire, unpredictability was the mark of primitives, not a weapon worth fearing. The first clashes seemed to justify their arrogance. Imperial war fleets swept into border sectors, burning outlying colonies and reducing stations to wreckage. Propaganda broadcasts carried images of human defeats, claiming that resistance was already crumbling. Yet beneath the smoke and flame, something unexpected took root. Every loss provided the humans with data. Every engagement became a lesson. Their command structures absorbed battlefield outcomes at staggering speed, adjusting strategies within days rather than months. What other races would call chaos, humans called adaptation. Small strike groups tested the Empire's patrol patterns, feigning weakness to lure larger vessels into traps. Human engineers refitted older ships with improvised systems, sacrificing elegance for lethality. Software specialists exploited vulnerabilities in alien encryption, turning communications into weapons of confusion. Where the Empire moved with rigid doctrine, humanity bent rules, twisted methods, and turned setbacks into opportunities. The effect was disorienting. Battles that should have been simple victories turned into costly stalemates. On the ground, Imperial soldiers found human defenders unwilling to surrender even when surrounded. Entire regiments fought to the last breath, forcing the Empire to expend resources at a pace that alarmed its logisticians. Prisoners taken by the Empire did not beg or cower, they stared with unbroken defiance, sometimes even smiling, as though they knew the war was only beginning. Commanders accustomed to obedience began to question whether they were fighting an enemy that measured victory by different standards altogether. Alien observers within the council started to murmur. They saw that humanity's strength was not measured in tonnage of ships or number of troops, but in the refusal to accept defeat as final. A battle lost was not the end of a campaign. It was the start of a counterstrike refined by hard lessons. In private gatherings, some species whispered that the humans reminded them of predators from their own evolutionary histories, small, underestimated, but relentless once provoked. The Empire continued to claim control, but its confidence faltered. Supply routes that had always been secure began to collapse under sudden human raids. Outposts went dark, their garrisons overwhelmed by tactics no algorithm had predicted. For every world the Empire reduced to ash, humans struck deeper into their infrastructure, cutting lines of communication and isolating fleets. The war, once expected to be a display of dominance, began to drain resources faster than anticipated. Still, the Empire clung to pride. To admit vulnerability would be to invite rebellion from within their domains. They doubled their rhetoric, declaring that humanity's resistance was nothing but desperation. Yet beneath the surface, commanders understood a truth they could not voice. This enemy was unlike any they had faced. Others had begged for mercy when broken. Humans, even shattered, only sharpened their resolve. Every engagement carved the same message into the galaxy's memory. Humanity was not fighting for expansion or prestige. They were not defending territory in the traditional sense. They fought for vengeance, for dignity, for the memory of one envoy cut down in arrogance. And with each clash, the Empire discovered that an enemy willing to suffer anything for principle was far more dangerous than an empire fighting only to preserve power. The tide began to shift when humanity ceased answering the Empire's blows with defense, and instead struck at the arteries that kept their vast dominion alive. Human fleets no longer sought to meet the Empire head-on in battles of scale. They carved into the hidden framework of supply, infrastructure, and morale. Convoys once considered untouchable vanished into silence. Fuel depots erupted in fire. Communications hubs that had coordinated entire sectors went dark within hours of carefully orchestrated assaults. The Empire's size, once its greatest strength, now became a vulnerability exploited with ruthless precision. Human commanders understood that victory would not come from matching ship for ship but from dismantling the scaffolding of imperial power. Where the Empire projected control through spectacle, humanity attacked the foundation that allowed such displays. Intelligence officers worked ceaselessly, intercepting signals, twisting them into false orders, and watching entire enemy task forces drift aimlessly in confusion. Hackers infiltrated civilian networks and turned imperial propaganda against itself, replaying recordings of the Diplomat's execution alongside the growing list of imperial defeats. The psychological effect spread faster than any fleet. Battlefronts that should have been secure faltered. Imperial soldiers accustomed to easy victories found themselves facing enemies who struck from impossible angles, withdrawing before retaliation could land. Boarding parties of human marines earned reputations as nightmares incarnate. They moved through the corridors of enemy vessels with relentless discipline, their adaptability in close quarters reducing veteran crews to panic. Survivors spoke in hushed tones of warriors who fought as if death itself was an afterthought, as though vengeance outweighed survival. The deeper humanity pressed into imperial space, the more allies appeared from the shadows. Species long enslaved by imperial dominance began to sabotage their overseers, emboldened by the sight of the Empire bleeding for the first time in centuries. Covert transmissions carried star maps, supply schedules, and access codes directly to human command. Though few dared to openly declare alliance, their silent contributions became fuel for the advance. Humanity accepted these gifts not as charity but as confirmation that the Empire's rule was fracturing under the weight of its own cruelty. The galaxy began to murmur a phrase once whispered only in rumor: humans fight differently. They do not march toward victory with steady discipline alone, nor do they crumble under loss. Instead, every defeat is devoured and reshaped into a sharper blade. Their will to continue grows stronger in proportion to the suffering they endure. Alien strategists, watching from afar, realized that humanity was not seeking balance or compromise. They sought annihilation of the very system that had mocked them. The battles themselves grew into legends. Fleets of human warships punched through lines previously considered impenetrable, scattering dreadnoughts with tactics so unorthodox they resembled madness until the results became undeniable. Imperial admirals, shackled by rigid doctrines, could not comprehend an enemy that turned unpredictability into its primary weapon. Entire sectors burned, not as a result of brute force, but because the Empire could no longer anticipate what humanity might do next. For the first time in living memory, the throne world of the Empire heard alarms of approaching fleets. Humanity had clawed its way across vast distances, leaving wreckage in its path, and now stood on the doorstep of the heart of imperial pride. The Council of Species, once content to watch silently, erupted in shock. Some pleaded for intervention, terrified of the scale of vengeance about to unfold. Others sat in silence, realizing that nothing could halt the storm humanity had unleashed. The Empire, desperate to project confidence, declared that the final defense would hold. Yet every being watching across the stars could sense the shift. The predator that had mocked a peaceful envoy now faced an adversary that had transformed grief into unbreakable unity, rage into precise strategy, and survival into a creed of retribution. The war was no longer about fleets or colonies. It was about a single truth the galaxy could not ignore. Humanity had proven that when dishonored, they did not merely respond. They consumed the insult, forged it into iron, and hurled it back with such force that even empires trembled. The siege of the throne world was not just the culmination of battles, It was the verdict of a species that had been underestimated one time too many. The throne world of the Empire, once untouchable, found itself encircled by fleets that bore the banners of Earth. Human warships, forged in haste yet tempered in endless conflict, filled the void with their presence. Every hull carried the weight of vengeance, every crew the memory of a murdered envoy. The Empire had prepared defenses layered over centuries, fortresses bristling with weapons, fleets positioned in orbits meant to inspire fear. Yet against the storm that now approached, those bastions were nothing more than walls of sand before a rising tide. The assault began without ceremony. Waves of missiles and beams cut through orbital lines, dismantling fortresses one by one. Imperial admirals barked orders with the same authority they had wielded for generations, but those commands unraveled the moment human tactics shifted mid-battle. No pattern held long enough to counter. Entire wings of Imperial ships found themselves flanked by squadrons that appeared where no opening should have existed. Communications collapsed under interference, officers shouted into silence, and fleets disintegrated not from lack of strength but from an enemy who refused to fight by any doctrine they understood. As the outer defenses fell, panic spread through the civilian sectors of the throne world. For centuries they had lived under the illusion that their rulers were invincible. Now broadcasts flooded across the planet, showing human forces breaking through, their advance unstoppable. Riots ignited in the streets, not against the invaders but against the very empire that had sworn protection. Entire districts turned against their overseers, tearing down the symbols of imperial pride as human fleets pushed closer. The final blow came when ground forces descended. Human soldiers, armored and relentless, poured into the capital. They fought not with the desperation of survival but with the calm certainty of justice long delayed. Every step forward was precise, every clash a reminder that they carry not only weapons but the will of billions behind them. Imperial guards, once considered elite beyond challenge, broke under the weight of opponents who refused to yield even when outnumbered. Hall after hall of the palace fell, until the invaders stood before the seat of the emperor himself. The ruler of the empire, who had laughed as the human envoy was slain, now found himself cornered in the same chamber. His voice, once thunderous, cracked with rage and fear as he demanded negotiations. He promised concessions, swore to respect humanity's place, pleaded for mercy when threats rang hollow. But the humans had not come for promises. They had come for the balance that had been stolen the moment blood spilled on the council floor. The execution was swift, broadcasted across every channel the Empire once controlled. The same hall that had mocked peace now witnessed its reversal, and the galaxy saw the cost of arrogance laid bare. With the Emperor's fall, the Empire fractured in days. Worlds that had bowed for centuries erupted in rebellion. Vassal states declared independence, their banners rising faster than the shattered imperial fleets could respond. Humanity did not seize these territories. They let the fragments scatter, ensuring only that the tyrant's reach would never return. They demanded no throne, only recognition of the truth carved into the stars, that to harm one human was to awaken all of them. The Council of Species, shaken from complacency, reconvened in uneasy silence. Where once humanity had been dismissed as upstarts, now no voice dared to challenge their presence. Delegates who had turned their faces away during the envoy's slaughter now bowed their heads, unwilling to test the resolve of those who had toppled an empire. Fear and respect merged into a single sentiment, etched into the memory of every civilization that had watched the vengeance unfold. The war ended not with treaties but with a lesson. The galaxy learned that humans did not measure power in fleets alone, nor in numbers, nor in wealth. Their strength was in unity when wronged, in the transformation of grief into a weapon sharper than any blade. They fought not to conquer but to ensure that no one could again believe them weak. From that day forward, whispers spread across every star system, carried in both dread and reverence. Do not provoke Earth. Do not test the patience of a species that endures insult as silence but answers injustice with fire. The diplomat's memory lived on, not as a victim but as the spark that had revealed what humanity truly was. The Empire was gone, but the warning remained, etched into the fabric of galactic history. Humanity does not forgive, and humanity does not forget.